Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime series where we add value to people's lives, happening every Wednesday and Thursday on ebizradio.com. You can catch the Lunchtime series on all major podcast channels, and on today's coaching segment, back with us, he's a life lover, a culture advisor, a keynote speaker and writer, the executive director of Walking the Talk, Jerome Parisse-Brassens. How are you doing, Jerome?
I'm doing really well. Good afternoon, Kevin.
Thank you for making some time. It's so good to have you back. I remember having a really good conversation with you last time, and I was thinking, I want to get some really good conversation back on air, and I was like, I need to get Jerome. Jerome had such wonderful advice to give businesses out there. So,
Thank
Jerome,
you.
don't you want to just kick it off with telling us a little bit about Walking the Talk and what the business is about, and then sort of preface what we are going to be speaking about today.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Walking the Talk is a global consultancy that is solely focused on culture and leadership. So we're a group of people around the world that have an absolute passion for culture. And we help the organizations that we work with work on, if you want, their target culture, then identify their culture, the culture they have, and then just bridge the gap and we work along with them on their culture journey.
Fantastic. Yes. And in today's conversation, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about, right? So the need to understand why and what to measure when it comes to culture and understanding it better.
Yeah, I thought today we could start with discussing how to measure culture. It's one of the questions that many of our clients ask. They're not too sure how to do it. So I thought it would be a good topic for today.
So first question then, on that point is, can you actually measure a culture? Because, a lot of the times you find that there's so many aspects, especially when you're dealing with a larger organization, there's so many aspects to take into consideration, so many dynamics at play. Can you actually measure culture? Is that even possible?
Yes, absolutely. You can measure culture. And you're very right that culture is a lot of things. So at Walking the Talk, we really focus on the behaviors of the people and what drives those behaviors, if you want, the mindsets and the values that drive the behaviors that you're seeing. And this is really what we focus on measuring. But one thing I just want to say straight away is that many HR leads that I meet think they're measuring culture by measuring engagement. And there's a big difference between culture and engagement. I think we discussed that last time. Engagement is very much the motivation that people have to do their work if they're happy at work, whereas culture is those patterns of behavior that get encouraged or discouraged. So here's the trick. If you're using your engagement survey thinking that you've got a measure of your culture to manage your culture, it's not going to work because you're actually measuring an outcome of culture. And that doesn't give you the right levers to pull when you want to change things. And the last thing I want to say around engagement, it takes time to measure. You've got the annual engagement survey that many organizations use. So several months down the track, you've got your data, and then you're going to start managing the organization with that data. And that's not going to work quite as well. So you really need to measure culture. Engagement's great. Measure it by all means, but also measure culture. It's different.
And also, you speak about measuring behavior, and I think a lot of people have the perception or the idea that sending out a questionnaire is enough, and that's not necessarily true, right? It's a tool, but that doesn't necessarily measure, and it also doesn't give a true reflection of what the behavior of that culture looks like.
Yeah, no, this is so true. Actually, there are many tools that you can use to measure culture. And a big mistake that I see people do is that they use a tool or the wrong tool to measure what they want to measure. So the first question that you need to ask yourselves when you want to measure culture is why you want to measure culture. And depending on the answer to that question, then you will pick the tool that you need for the answer to that question, right? And if you want, there's three reasons that why you may want to measure your culture. The first one is you may want to have a fine description of what your current culture is like. You want to understand it because you want to know whether it's an asset or a liability to your business based on your strategy or what you're trying to do. So you may not know your culture really well, and you want an overall description of that culture. So it's really descriptive in nature.
Yeah.
And here, Kevin, this is where you were talking about questionnaires and surveys. This is where they're the best. It's about quantitative data, and surveys are perfect to do that. And the last thing I want to say about that one is that you shouldn't do it every 6 months or even every year. I think is a bit too often. It's something that I would advise organizations to do every 2 years or so.
Yeah. So how do we do it exactly? So, when we want to measure this behavior, what's the breakdown on how we do this? How do we do it?
Well, with the survey, so that's the first reason why. With the survey, you actually have a list of questions, and those questions need to be phrased around behaviors. So in our organization, I see people holding others to account, or in our organizations, I see people, or in our organization, people ask questions to understand. So you need to be very clear on those behaviors, and you need to use a framework. At Walking the Talk, we've got a specific framework around cultural archetypes. So that's the survey bit. But the second question that people sometimes want an answer for is, what's happening in our culture? What is the why of our culture? What drives the behaviors? And this is where you want to understand the values and what I call the shared belief system that exists across the business and that will drive people to do the things they do. And that this work is more diagnostic in nature. And to understand the why, to do the diagnostic of your culture, you probably need to use focus groups or kind of discussions, because it's really qualitative data that you're after. And this kind of data from a survey, it's really hard to get. So you need to ask people, the famous 5 whys to get down to the bottom of what is driving the organization, the belief system. So that's a diagnostic, if you want. That's the second question that you may ask yourself.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll talk about the third one straight away before we go more into detail. The third one is you may want to track your culture or some elements of your culture. Let's just say that you're working on something, you're trying to increase accountability and customer centricity. Well, what you want to measure is it working? Is it having an impact? Do we still have momentum? In that case, you're not interested about your whole culture, but you're interested in following either over time or across audiences, whether those bits that you're really focusing on are changing. And you can use, here you can use a pulse survey. Pulse surveys are very useful every 3 months or so to measure momentum, moving from awareness to commitment to action. But you can also use a 360 surveys for leaders in particular to really measure their culture, the behavior they're displaying, and if they're shifting. So these are the 3 things: descriptive, diagnostic, or tracking over time.
So one of the things that just sort of sideline that sort of comes up for me, and I just want to get your sort of insights on that, is, do you do this anonymously, or do you do it, so that you actually know who's actually giving the actual feedback? Because do you find that perhaps in cultures, people sometimes say what they think people want to hear, and then there's a bit of a mix in messaging and outcome?
Well, it really depends on the culture, right? If you've got a culture that is very open to start with, that'll be less of a problem. If you've got a culture that is highly hierarchical and not too open, you may want to pay attention to the anonymous aspect of things. Well, surveys are always anonymous. Surveys are great because you get demographics. So you can see, for example, in this business unit, in this country, what's the difference and so on. But yes, it has to be anonymous. The focus groups that I was talking about, we always advise it to be completely anonymous. If you want people to really say what they've got on their heart, in their heart, what they're seeing happening, sometimes it relates also to leadership. It has to be completely anonymous. Now, the Pulse survey is anonymous as well, but the 360, I mentioned the 360 to sort of measure leadership behaviors, if you want. It is anonymous without being anonymous. So we would advise leaders to nominate or ask people to give them a rating, but then you pull it together so that it's anonymous, so that people feel completely free to give their leader or their colleagues, or the score that they think they should get based on their behaviors. So yes, I mean, in summary, yes, you want it to be as anonymous as possible.
And I'm just looking, and that's exactly what walking the talk is all about, right? You especially when it comes to culture, as a leader, whether you're being measured anonymously or not, you want a true reflection of what people think, because that's how we grow, that's how we change, that's how we learn, that's how we lead. Right? Leaders are there to be able to challenge themselves in any case.
Yeah.
Again, that also speaks to the culture of leadership within an organization, because if that's not a consideration, to be open to being judged and measured according to, am I practicing what I preach?
Yeah. And we call that walking the talk for a reason, because working on culture at the end of the day is aligning the walk with the talk. And the talk, it's our aspiration, what we want to be. So as a leader, my talk is going to be like what I want people to do, how I want them to behave, how I think I am behaving. But the walk is actually how I really behave. And when you measure in a 360, you measure behaviors, what we measure is the walk, right? And then the leader had a bit of a shock sometimes, or sometimes not, in terms of, oh, this is my walk, so this is how people perceive my behaviors, which may be, or may be, or may not be completely aligned with what I think I am projecting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's fascinating.
So, one of the things that you mentioned here is, talk to us about belief systems that exist within the organization, and why this is important around culture, and can we actually change this? Can we change belief systems within the culture? Because I think when people, depending again, whatever organization you're dealing with, if you do find yourself in a very negative belief system or negative culture, it's very difficult to change that, right? And how would you change it if you could?
Well, that's the key question at the end of the day, because I usually say that when you want to change a behavior, the target for change is the belief. So what drives our behaviors? There's lots of things that drive our behaviors, but in particular, you've got the values, right, of the organization. You've also got our feelings. There can be some elements of context, but there is this shared belief system that exists in the organization. And the belief system is linked to the values and everything else, but it's been built over time based on the different leaders, the leadership you've had, some context element, what's happened to the organization. And it exists. Very often it is unconscious, but it drives a lot of the behaviors that you're seeing. And what we find when we do the diagnosis on culture, we're looking for the 1, 2, sometimes 3 core beliefs that actually drive everything else in the organization. And there's always 1 or 2 that are so strong that they drive everything. Example, it's all about results first here, or it's financials first here, right? So it's hitting your results is what matters here and nothing else. So obviously, if that's the case, people are going to be driven towards driving their individual results and things like that, and they may not be doing other things that you want them to do. Or maybe there may be a feeling or a belief that actually here in this organization, employees are not truly valued. And by the way, those beliefs are based on their reality. So it can be closely or not aligned to the reality of the organization. But if people believe that they're not valued, they're not going to speak up. They're not going to, actually, it's not going to drive a strong engagement, but their behaviors are going to be based on that. So you need to be able to really identify that belief system and then change it to really deeply change your culture if you want. Otherwise, it's not going to shift.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating.
And as you're speaking, I'm just thinking, from work that I've also done in the culture space, and when it comes to belief systems, it's true that once you find there's 3 or 4 that sort of are always sort of rearing their heads out, you can, you can also see what leadership is sort of driving from top downwards, based on those beliefs, because people intrinsically just have this unspoken belief, and they don't even know why it's happening in this environment. But it's not always conscious. It's not always a cognitive thing we're doing. We're just doing it because it's the nature of business, or numbers are, you've got to crunch the numbers, or things are changing, and we have this underlying belief, and we're not aware of the fact that we have this belief.
Organizations, for me, they're living organisms, just like a human being. And there's a real parallel between an organization, a company, or a business, and a human being. As a human being, we do have beliefs, some of them conscious or unconscious. And a lot of them come from when we were children, right? Our parents, our family, our bringing, everything else, but also our experience, what we've lived through. So we have this shared belief, well, not shared, individual belief system. And organizations have the same thing, except it's shared by the people. And interestingly, the alignment or misalignment between your personal individual beliefs and the beliefs of the organization, it's a bit like values, is really interesting for leaders to be aware of, if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. But now, one of the things you mentioned is that, how do we change beliefs? Because as much as they're relevant, and sometimes we're not even consciously aware of them. What is your take on how we actively get involved in changing a belief?
That's a really interesting question. And because many of our clients, many people that I speak to, think that actually you can't change them. Now, what I find is that under the behaviors, what's under the surface of the water, there's a hierarchy. And for example, what's really deep in the hierarchy, if you think of the iceberg model, right? There's the personality that you don't really change it, right? Then there's the values. The values are established over time. We can change values, but it takes time as well. And I'll find that the beliefs are usually halfway between the values and those deeper elements and what's on the surface. So it's a bit easier to change beliefs than it would be to change values. So that's why working on beliefs is quite powerful. Now, there's two types of beliefs. There's what I would call the rational beliefs or intellectual beliefs, and you have the more emotional types of beliefs. So a rational belief could be, but it may not be rational, so it may be more intellectual, but a belief could be like, oh, it's really hard to export into China, to enter the Chinese market, right? I could have that belief. Now, the way to change that belief when they're intellectual or rational is to show you a different set of data, to show you data that says the opposite or something different. So for example, you're going to show me, well, look, Jerome, this is the list of companies that have just entered the Chinese market in the last month alone. And you're showing me, 200,000 organizations or whatever. I cannot go against that. So you were right, actually. Maybe I was wrong. So these are beliefs that are a bit easier to change with a set of data. And that can work for individuals or for the organization. Now, what do you think about the emotional beliefs? Any idea how to change emotional beliefs? What do we do? Can you think of way apart from data? What kind of data?
I think that would be emotional beliefs would be. I think it would probably stem from the language we use.
Yeah, that's very strong. Absolutely. So the language we use is actually a symbol of what we believe. So changing language is a powerful way to change beliefs because they actually influence. I mean, there's neuroscience again that work with it and everything. So it's a really powerful way to do that. Now, emotional beliefs, what we tend to do in organizations and what you would do in coaching is actually discussion. So to change an emotional belief is very much about coaching questions, asking questions, and discussion. Whether you're working in a coaching session with an individual leader, or whether you're working on culture in the business, organizing not focus groups, but discussions in your team around what we believe is true, what we believe is not true, and what's happening. So it takes a bit more time, but that's the real way to change it. And language is a very powerful way of it's a lever for change here.
Yeah, and the reason why I say that, because framing and reframing obviously comes into play there, but also I think people are not very often people are not they're very they're unaware of their own languages or language patterns that they actually set themselves up with, until you bring it to their attention. I've sat in a meeting with leaders as well, just making notes of little comments that they would say throughout the meeting. And right at the end of the meeting, I would say to them, guys, I don't know if you know, but do you know that this is the language you've used throughout this hour? And bring it to their attention, right? And when you actually do that as a practice, people kind of go, oh wow, I didn't know that we negate so much, or we use this phrase so often, or and it sort of plays into the narrative of what is that conversation that you're keeping alive within your organization. It's really fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. Another example, right? You hear people talking about failures and mistakes a lot. Right away, I think, oh, okay, so there's a belief that you can't fail, probably. If they're talking about it a lot, is that because you can't fail, so that's bad, right? And probably there's something around results, there's something around looking good, a belief that you need to look good, beliefs like that. And what does it drive? Usually it drives a lack of innovation, because people will not want to talk about failures and mistakes because they will not want to be not looking good, right? So you don't spend time searching and looking for what's gone wrong and how you could do it differently. So when I hear that, and organizations want to learn more, they want to be more learning organization, become more innovative, I advise them to stop using mistakes and failures as words that they use all the time, but rather that lessons learned, learning, post-mortems, and things like that. So it's usually a symptom, Kevin, right? A symptom of something happening, right? A symptom of the belief system that may exist.
And just to bring it back to why that's so important to understand when we talk about culture, right? Because it informs what's happening and how we do everyday life within this organization.
Let me give you an example. You're seeing in the organization a pattern that is about control. Everybody's controlling, the leaders are micromanaging, they're making decisions at the level below from the level that it should be making decisions at. And everything is driven by control. So you don't like it. You think it's not driving empowerment. It's not driving the results you want in the organization. So you're trying to change it. You're asking leaders to be more empowering. You're asking them to stop controlling. But maybe there's a belief system underneath that it's results first. And if you don't achieve your results, you lose your job. I've seen that belief quite often, right? Well, that usually will drive control, because if people want to, and actually managers from the past generations tend to control a lot because it was all about results as well. So if you want to achieve your results, they feel that it's easier to control, because then you're going to be sure that you're going to make your results and everything. If you control less and you're more empowering, there's more risks that go with it. And more risks mean that maybe I'm not going to completely achieve my result. So I'm going to control more. So in this case, what the organization needs to do is look at that belief, it's results first. If you don't achieve your results, you're going to lose your job, and reframe that belief. You talked about reframing, right? That's the key. Reframing that belief. And do you want to, how do we do that? Or, I mean, reframing the beliefs is essential, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think it's so important, because I think it's almost like I said, we get into that unconscious habit formed way of using language. And we don't even consider, one of the conversations I've recently had is for leaders to step into a bit of a coaching mind frame of just saying, okay, this is the information I've received. How do I step back, and how do I then think about this? and think about what's happening, because you don't have a problem, you're just experiencing a challenge, right? And how do you articulate that best to your team so that it frames it correctly, so that it's not an away from strategy, it's a more towards to strategy, and just having them really get on board with what the language could be to support that. I think it's very important.
Yeah. So if you want to reframe, I mean, there's two elements, right? There's the working with individual leaders. So to all the leaders listening, I would say, if you want to reframe one of your beliefs, the first thing is to become aware of that belief. So really think about why you're behaving like that, why, until you get really to the bottom of it, and then you've got your belief. Yeah. But then many leaders I work with try to replace a belief by its opposite, right? For example, their belief may be, I need to control, and then try to replace by, I need to empower, or I can't control everything. It's very hard if you're like controlling, if you're going to believe that it works. So what you need to do is reframe it with a belief that is close enough that you can work on it, right? So for example, you can expand the belief into, I need to control when it's results that go to the top team only, or I need to control when it's this time of the year, and the rest of the time I don't need to control, or I need to control when it's with that audience, not with that. So you do that, and then you help the leader think about, well, how am I going to put it in practice, that new reframe belief, right? So what are the things I can do and put in place, the little tricks and so on, to make sure it works, and then self-reflect, as you were saying, because self-reflection and self-awareness is the key to the change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the role that leaders play in a change process? It's one of the questions that we have here, and we know that change management has a big part, especially when it comes to changing culture. But I often think leaders wanted to almost be like this magic wand and see it unfold in front of them. What is your stance and your your view on what the role leaders can play in the change process?
Yeah, I mean, there's several elements. There are three main things. The first one is they need to role model the culture they want to see. Don't ask your people to be empowering if you're not empowering yourself. So, that's the basics, but it's so important. If anything, that's the one thing they need to do. The second thing that they need to do is encourage those behaviors in others, right? So not only am I empowering, but I'm encouraging my team to be empowering. And I'm also, more than encouraging, I need to delegate it to them. I need to say, you must be empowering. That's part of the culture that we want. So I encourage you to be more empowering by recognizing you when you do it, by creating standards for you, but I must delegate. So you also have accountability to become more empowering, right? That's one element. And leaders need also to look at the way they're doing work with their team. So what are the processes we're using, and are the processes that we're using and that we have control over also leading to empowering people or not? And if not, what can we change? And based on what we've just discussed, I would advise leaders to work with their teams and find out within the team, what are some of the beliefs that exist in their team, right? Where's the people they lead? And find out, maybe there's some beliefs that they will discover that, oh, actually, that's not going to help us to drive what we want, the behaviors and the results. So let's work on it. Let's discuss it. And let's try to reframe it and change it. So leaders need to do that with their team. And if every single leader in the organization does that, that's going to change a lot of things.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that, because I think, especially when it comes to role modeling, right? Change, change is always great when people have to do it, but when I have to do it, like, what do you mean I have to do it? People have that sense of, what do you mean? It starts with me, and it does. Unfortunately, as the leader, you're the key component to the change management.
No, I'm the leader. It's for everybody else to do. I lead. No, it's hard. It's a hard message that leaders need to hear. It starts, culture starts from the top. Culture is led from the top. I mean, another way, the fish rots from the head. So yes. it needs to start at the top. So that's the role modeling aspect, but it's difficult, isn't it? So I always say, role model the things that are critical. Focus on this. Those things that are critical to you, to your team, and to the organization. and really be relentless about it and do not tolerate anything that goes against it.
Yeah. So, Jerome, I love this conversation. It fits right up my alley, and it's everything that I'm passionate about. But to conclude the conversation, do you have any advice to leaders out there, and just giving them some idea on what you could where they can start with really influencing and getting involved in their culture so that they do it the right way?
I think just based on the conversation we've had, I would say if you're the leader, the top leadership of an organization, or even the top leaders, if you want, it's essential to know your culture really well. And to know your culture really well, it's you need to be able to describe it really well. So that's what we're talking at the beginning. Know whether it's an asset or a liability, and you need to know what drives it. So we were talking about the shared belief system, the values that drive what people need to do, what people are doing. This is really, my advice would be, get to know your culture really, really well, because if you do, you've got the keys for change. And for leaders that are maybe at middle managers or people at that level, I would say do the same, but with your team. Get to know the culture of your team really well. What drives the team, what drives the people, what are the values and the beliefs that drive the behaviors that you're seeing? Because if you really know that well, deeply, you will know what to change. It's the first step, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Jerome Parisse-Brassens, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your insights and your understanding of and your in-depth understanding of this. I love it. I love it. I love it. I think it's going to add such wonderful value to so many people. Guys, if you want to find out more, where can we go to go and check out or find out more about Walking the Talk?
You can find us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, even on Facebook, and we've got a wonderful website, walkingthetalk.com. So in one word, walkingthetalk.com. There's lots of info on culture and leadership there.
Fantastic. That's Jerome Parisse, Executive Director from Walking the Talk. And thank you for joining us. And Jerome, hopefully chat to you soon. Thanks so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Kevin.
Cheers for now.
Cheers.